This is a Pulp archive recording. All public Pulp archive recordings are licensed under Creative Commons. For more information or to support us, please visit patreon.com/pulparchive. This episode was prepared by Soul and narrated by Edward, the digital narrator. The Mist Monster by Granville S. Horse. Weird Tales, February 1928. This episode contains period-typical depictions of crime, violence, and mild profanity. Listener discretion is advised. The newspaper account stated that Judson McSweet had gone into a cave near his cabin and in the prevailing darkness wandered too near the brink of a chasm, situated about 500 yards inside the cavern, where he lost his balance or stepped blindly into space and fell to destruction. He may have found his last resting place at the bottom of that pit. I think he did, but not in the manner stated by the newspapers. I am going to tell you here just what occurred. It will be just a bald statement of facts, which I quite realize will sound much like the dream of a disturbed imagination. McSweet had extended me a standing invitation to spend some time at his place. Well knowing my weakness, he represented the hunting and fishing as excellent, holding out alluring prospects of the sport to be enjoyed. It was long ere I could avail myself of his offer, but finally feeling that my affairs were in such shape that the business could be left with subordinates for a while, I wrote him to expect me early in November. After an all-day journey, I alighted at a small mountain station where Judson met me with a spring wagon drawn by one horse, and in this vehicle, which was already well loaded with bundles, he placed my luggage. "Been stocking up a bit," he explained. "Although there is plenty of fish and game, we can't live on that alone. I like a variety." McSweet was a small man, round and fat, entirely bald, with a cherubic face and mild blue eyes. He was dressed in rough outing clothes, the cap and top boots. He had suddenly retired from business some years before and bought a small tract of ground with a two-room cabin where he had since lived alone. In explanation, he had always answered that he preferred being next to nature, that the simple life met all his needs and suited him far better than the more complicated existence of the town or city. As we jolted over the rocky road through the evening gloom, I was surprised by his silence. He had always been a jolly man, full of fun and overflowing with conversation. His face now, as I glanced at him occasionally, seemed set and strained. As we came to a particularly rough stretch of road, the horse stumbled and almost fell. McSweet gave a vicious jerk at the reins and lashed the beast unmercifully, at the same time giving voice to several deep curses. "What on earth is the matter, Mac?" I exclaimed. "You are not yourself at all." "I noticed it at the station and have been marveling at the change in you ever since." "Oh, it's nothing," he replied. "I am all right, though I guess the devilish thing has gotten on my nerves a bit." "What thing?" I demanded. "I'll tell you in the morning. Here we are at the shack. We'll soon have a fire going and a supper good enough for your club. Anyway, it will be as substantial as anything they could give you there." He unharnessed the horse, loosing him to range at will, and we soon had the contents of the wagon transferred to the house. After a hearty repast, we sat before the stove with our pipes while he asked innumerable questions about friends and acquaintances whom he had not seen or heard of since renouncing civilization and settling in the wild spot he now called home. About 10 o'clock, we adjourned to the other room, two sides of which were fitted with bunks, while a third was lined with shelves filled with books and magazines. It was apparent how he was in the habit of spending his days and evenings. We were soon occupying the bunks, and I, for one, was not long in falling sound asleep. I arose at dawn, but early as I was, McSweet was up and busied with breakfast. "Ah, Hatton," he exclaimed cheerfully as I appeared in the doorway armed with rod and creel, "I see we are going to have fish for dinner, but bacon must suffice for breakfast." "Not for dinner," I replied. "I am going to put up a lunch and make a day of it. but I can promise you some good ones for tonight, if you have not deceived me about how your streams abound with them." We soon breakfasted, and as I prepared to depart, McSweet accompanied me to the door, where he paused, saying, "Hatton, I want particularly to call your attention to that cave you see, about 400 yards before us. Keep away from it during the afternoon hours, especially after 3 o'clock, as it is dangerous. The Indians have always lived in great fear of it, and those around here now say that in times past, sacrifices, both human and animal, were made to the thing they believed to dwell in its depths. They call it the Cave of the Wind Devil. I do not know what it is, but I do know that it is something evil and horrible, and to go in there at certain hours is death. The spring from which I get my water is about 10 yards inside the entrance, and I am very careful not to require a supply of it after a certain hour." "But what is it?" I asked. "Surely you must have some good reason for saying what you do and are not influenced by an old Indian superstition. What do you fear, and what has happened to make you speak so positively of danger?" "Superstition. Nothing, no. I am not influenced by the Indian legends, but have good reasons for saying what I do. I'll tell you more this evening, and maybe show you something too if you return at the right time. But remember what I have said and keep away from the place." He turned abruptly into the house, and there soon issued a prodigious rattling of pots and pans, indicating that no more information was to be had at that time. Wondering somewhat, I left the cabin, following a path which lay within about 20 feet of the cave where I paused. The place looked ordinary enough, like hundreds of others, to be found in all mountain regions. It may have been the result of what I had just heard, but as I stood gazing into the cavernous depths, I felt a chill creep along my spine and a sense of deadly fear steal over me. "Tut tut," I muttered. "This will never do. Am I letting Mac's wild talk make a fool of me?" Turning in a sort of panic, I hurried on toward the river. It was a fine morning, crisp and cold, with a touch of frost in the air. I pushed forward vigorously through the brambles and other dead growths of summer, and soon reached my destination. McSweet had not exaggerated the abundance of fish, and in a short time my creel contained some fine ones. I built a fire about noon and ate my lunch, which I thoroughly enjoyed, in spite of the fact that it had become quite cold and somewhat dry. About 3 o'clock, I decided to return to the cabin. I had all the fish we could use, and while they were still biting, it seemed a shame to take more from the water than would supply our wants. Drawing near the clearing, I heard loud curses, then shouts, vengeful and gleeful in turn. As I hurried through the trees and around a small hill, a strange sight met my eyes. Judson McSweet was hopping about some distance in front of the cave and hurling stones into the mouth of it. "Ah, you devil!" he shouted. "How was that?" "So, you creeping monster, right through you. There, you fiend, and there, and there, and there." I hurried toward him, my eyes fixed intently on the entrance to the cave. I could see nothing but a grey, billowing mist which filled the entire opening. As his missiles disappeared into this mass, a puff of vapor would spurt forth, much in the manner of smoke on the discharge of a gun. These spurts of vapor were accompanied by a horrible odor, a sickening, dead, carrion odor. As I drew nearer, I could feel the same sense of chilly fear steal over me which I had noticed in the morning. The cloud had by now receded into the depths of the cave, and by the time I reached McSweet, it had entirely disappeared. He stood panting from his exertions, shaking his fist, growling inaudibly. "What on earth is the matter, Mac?" I exclaimed. "Have you gone crazy? Did you see it?" he cried. "Oh, the inhuman, devouring thing waiting to draw me into its cold, clammy maw. And listen to it. It is angry and seems to be telling me that someday it will not fail. From the interior of the cavern came a wailing and roaring sound as of a high wind sweeping over a neglected graveyard. "I saw nothing," I replied, "but a cloud of mist. Collect yourself. Why were you throwing stones and acting in such a wild manner?" "That was it, Hatton. What you call mist. But it is not that. No, no, it is a deadly agency of some sort which destroys and leaves no trace." "Why do you say that?" "It is true, the stuff smelled rather bad, but so far as I could observe, it did not seem capable of much harm. It is probably a mist which rises periodically from some subterranean river." "Mist nothing. No, there is intelligence and power there. During the first months of my stay here, my only companions were a cat and dog. Poor old Tom, it got him. During the hot weather, he was in the habit of sleeping just at the mouth of the cave where it was cool. One day I was sitting in the door of my cabin when I suddenly heard a number of terrified squalls from the cave. Looking up, I beheld poor Tom, his head and forefeet projecting from the vaporous mass. He seemed to be struggling desperately to get out, but was gradually sucked in. His cries ceased, and the cloud retreated into the cavern. I hastened to the cave, but he was gone. Since then, I have seen several small animals disappear in a like manner. First a rabbit, then a fox, and finally a wolf. They had apparently gone to the spring for water." "Remarkable," I exclaimed. "Can it be that the cloud we saw is some sort of poisonous vapor which rises at intervals from the depths of the earth and overcomes whatever living thing it envelops?" "It can't be that." "No. A gas of that nature would cause death, but it certainly would not be able to remove the body of the victim." "No. This is an intelligent agency of some sort, devilish and deadly. A dog would not fear gas, would it?" "Well, I had a dog, and after the disappearance of the cat, I noticed what I had failed to observe before, that he would not go within 100 feet of the cave. So one day I took him by the collar and dragged him to the entrance. He whined and struggled desperately, but I persisted, and after getting a few feet within the cave, released him. The poor animal gave one terrified howl and dashed out, disappearing among the trees, and I have seen nothing more of him." "It is certainly strange," I returned thoughtfully. "You say this cloud appears at regular intervals?" "Not exactly, no. It is likely to come out at any time in the afternoon, though I have never seen it before 3 o'clock. We must make a careful investigation. Whatever the phenomenon is, you may be certain it is caused by natural agencies." "I am afraid any investigation will come to nothing," he answered rather despairingly. "I have just about adopted the Indian belief that the thing is a devil, something superhuman, anyway." "Nonsense," I replied. "Come on into the house. I have a fine creel of fish here. Let's give them our undivided attention," and resume discussion of this queer thing in the morning. After an excellent repast, we talked and read until bedtime, but without recurring to the thing in the cave. Neither was it mentioned the next day, and as things turned out, it was never mentioned again. I spent the next 3 days hunting and fishing, keeping our table well supplied. As I drew near the cabin on my return the 4th day, I was startled by wild cries and screams from the direction of the cave. "Help! Help! Oh, it's got me! Oh, the cold, clammy devil! Help! Help!" I hurried forward, soon coming to the cave. The grey vapor filled the mouth of the cavern. McSweet's head and shoulders projected from the foggy mass, a look of unutterable fear on his round face. He clawed wildly at the empty air, and it was plain to be seen that he was making desperate efforts to make his way out of the billowing mass, but was apparently held fast. "Courage, Mac!" I shouted. "I am here!" As I neared him, I brought up my gun, discharging the contents into the grey mass above his head, causing putrid spots of vapor to shoot forth where the charge had entered. Dropping the empty weapon, I rushed forward to seize him by the arms, but my shots seemed to have hastened the end, for he was suddenly enveloped in the cloud, which rapidly retreated into the cave. I got out my flashlight and followed, but all was quiet and the air clear, though there was a noticeable odor of dead and moldy matter. I continued forward until I reached what was seemingly the edge of a precipice. My spotlight failed to find the bottom, and stones dropped, gave back no sound. I shouted repeatedly, but the echo of my own voice was the only reply. Judson Mech's suite was gone. I remained at the cabin 2 days longer, hoping against hope. The cloud, now seeming to me ominous and deadly, billowed from the mouth of the cave each day, but I made no attempt to investigate its nature. Of course, I gave no thought to the idea that it was of supernatural origin. Could it be possible, I wondered, for some slimy, horrible monster of the Jurassic Age or some other period when the world was young to survive and have its lair in those dark depths? That it came up into the light each day in search of food, and was able to mask its movements by discharging that evil-smelling vapor, much the same as the present-day octopus in the depths of the ocean surrounds itself with an inky blackness when attacked. I wonder. The Black Castle by Marc R. Schorer and August W. Derleth. Weird Tales, May, 1927. This episode contains period-typical depictions of crime, violence, and mild profanity. Listener discretion is advised. The Black Castle, high up on the cliff, stood solitary and lone, silhouetted against the moon. By day, the castle was prominent, but by night, in the full moonlight, it was much more so. It stood in relief. There were no trees, only a few shrubs that grew along the irregular sides of the mountain. To the fore, the cliff was sheer, and, topping this declivity, the ominous structure looked malevolently down upon the little village of Chevaux. The village was completely enveloped in shadow, for the moon had not yet risen to a sufficient height to diminish the broad shadow of the mountain. Every soul in the peaceful village was in repose under the pleasing mantle of darkness. Upon it, the village was like a picture by an artist. All in darkness save a few thin wisps of smoke, spiraling from several chimneys and rising until they were caught in the light of the moon streaming down upon the plain from above the castle, then dispersing and vanishing into the crisp air. In sharp contrast to the calm of the exterior, a grim drama was being enacted within the castle. In a large room in one of the turrets of the chateau, the aged Count de Chevaux sat at a ponderous oaken table. The moon cast a patch of light upon the floor, which, aided by the flickering gleam of the flambeaux in their brackets on the table and the fitful light from the flames of the fire in the grate, served to light up a portion of the room. The room was almost bare. The walls, save for a coat of arms above the fireplace and a faded portrait of an ancient ancestor of the de Chevaux exactly opposite it, were devoid of ornamentation. The painted figure in the portrait gazed with great dignity at the coat of arms, as if in approval. The floor likewise was bare of decoration. A few cumbersome chairs, situated at the two entrances of the chamber, gave the room an atmosphere of heaviness of gloom. The firelight played upon a great skin stretched out upon the stone floor before the grate, and the gleaming teeth in the head of the pelt shone malevolently. The sputtering flambeau on the table disclosed the Count's pale features, and made evident the extreme agitation that held him in its grasp. His face twitched oddly, and his hands trembled. He looked as if he was suffering from the palsy. He was writing, but not of his own volition, for his hand moved steadily and unhesitatingly across the parchment upon the table, while his glaring eyes were fixed with fierce intensity upon the lines of writing. There were no sounds in the room save the crackling of the flames in the grate, the scratching of the pen upon the parchment, and the occasional eerie sputtering of the flambeau. Suddenly the hand quavered and ceased its motion, and the Count seized the opportunity to reread what had been written. His throat became dry, and a violent trembling shook his body as he read the lines. His hand had written, "Monsieur, I am here." 1. Armand Chamboy, I have come to speak to you tonight, through my sole medium, your pen and hand. Does Monsieur remember me? My astral self gazes complacently down upon you. Perhaps, if Monsieur cannot recall my name, he can bring to mind an incident of 12 months ago when he so calmly compelled me to dispose of my material self, to favor his fortunes. Ah, Monsieur does, I perceive by his agitation. My widow suffers from the cold, Monsieur. My children starve, and I am helpless here. But you, ah, Monsieur, you cower about your fire in company of that simple-minded son of yours. Ah, Monsieur, you live life. But then I have naught to complain about. I am free and can taste no ills. It is because of my mortal widow and my suffering children, Monsieur, that I complain. I cannot help them, Monsieur, but I can avenge the wrongs you have done them. The wrongs, Monsieur, that you have done for gold? I can avenge innumerable sins committed for the sake of your fortunes. Does it seem foolish to you, Monsieur, that I should be writing this? That I, an astral, should threaten vengeance, but it should not. For those black blots, those books on sorcery on your shelves, have taught you overmuch. Yet, you may wonder how I can avenge the wrongs you have done, Monsieur, and I shall tell you. The hand started to move again, and the Count followed his pen with his eyes. It is simple, Monsieur, so simple. A rare experiment, Monsieur, simply this. For a 12-month, I have been gathering knowledge upon varied subjects, and my field is unbounded. Your son, Monsieur, has been a resident of this gloomy castle since he can remember, and his brain is crude and his soul is unrefined. But I, Monsieur, I am strong. My mind excels in all, Monsieur, but I have no body. And also, Monsieur, I seek revenge. My abode is here by your side, Monsieur. My solution is this. Day by day, night by night, I will cast my superior power against your son's feeble will. I will drive out his astral body, his soul, Monsieur, and I will enter and possess his body. Then, Monsieur, I will kill you brutally, unhesitatingly, as you deserve. The writing ceased, and the Count could move his hand at his will. He stared at the mute evidence of the astral. Suddenly he rose, and with an angry snarl he cast the parchment from him into the hungry flames in the grate. He rubbed his hands across his eyes, futilely endeavoring to blot out the words that danced maliciously before him. He clasped his fists and glared angrily into the fire. Slowly he turned, walked toward the main corridor of the castle, and was swallowed up in the thick darkness. It was 2 weeks later. The young Count de Chevaux had acted strangely that day. His father had noticed this, and it impressed him. He pondered long upon it as he sat alone in his chamber. The more he tried not to think of the parchment which he had so vehemently thrown from him 2 weeks ago, the more he thought of it and associated it with his son's strange behavior. The astral of that trompeau was getting in its fine work, mused de Chevaux. He could see no way to stop it. For once in his life, the Count de Chevaux was helpless. The thought unnerved him. One day, some time later, the elder Count observed his son watching him covertly through half-closed eyes. He thought at once of Armand Chamboy. His son was twirling a heavy walking stick, and he had been staring at his parent out of the corners of his eyes. The elder Count frowned heavily at his son, but the latter seemed not to notice. However, he removed his gaze and placidly continued to twirl his cane. The incident bothered the Count not a little, and soon he went to his library to consult his store of books on the black arts. The winter slipped by and spring came. The village of Chevaux was busy as a hive of bees. From the other side of the mountain, towering above the village, came the rushing, roaring sound of a great waterfall as it tumbled down the mountainside from crag to crag, from ledge to ledge, until it struck the plain with a great noise and went rushing off to water the fertile fields of the peasants. The birds were nesting, and the early spring flowers were beginning to force their way up through last year's leaves. The snowbanks were almost all gone. Only here and there on the sides of the mountain a few were visible, and they too were fast melting under the warm rays of the April sun. But inside the castle all was not so calm. The old count was pacing to and fro in his library. He was uneasy, and he had good cause to be so, for his books of black magic could not aid him in the predicament in which he now found himself. A week ago his son had been taken ill. This was after a gradual decline. His illness could not be diagnosed. It seemed as if the patient was overcome by weariness, although he had never exerted himself to any harmful extent. For some time he lay in a coma, then suddenly he emerged and manifested a wish to rise. He had done so healthier in mind and in body. At any other time, it would have been a perfectly natural occurrence. But now, the aged count thought continually of Armand Champois and his threat. His son did not seem the same to him. His actions were so strange, so alien, so utterly foreign to his nature. The elder Count de Chevreuse was very perturbed over an incident that had occurred during the day. His son had removed a long-bladed stiletto from its rack in the library and had taken it to his chamber. The count knew, because he had watched him, had stealthily followed the youth, and observed his every action. That night, a storm broke over the castle, shattering the placidity of the little village of Chevreuse, and, for the first time, the elements were in agreement with the life within the castle. The aged count's mind was in turmoil, but one thought stood out above the agitated throng. His son was about to kill him, of that he was sure. That Champois had succeeded in his evil purpose of possessing the body of his son during his recent illness, and he was brooding on the dreadful course that presented itself to him as his only alternative. At length he came to a conclusion, and with guilty steps he withdrew from the room. A flash of lightning revealed him stepping through the doorway, and his hand clutched a stiletto, the companion of the one his son had concealed in his chamber. He groped his way up the stone stairway, and with each step his purpose became firmer. He would fool that Champois, thwart him at his vengeance. At his son's doorway he paused and clutched the weapon a little tighter. He listened for sounds, but he heard nothing save the regular breathing of his son within. He pushed the door before him and slipped quietly into the room where his son slept. The count emerged from the doorway, and his hand was empty. Silently he trod down the stone steps, and quietly he resumed his seat in the library. The storm was becoming more violent with the passing of the hours. Idly he picked up the quill before him and toyed with it. He had thwarted Champois at his own purpose. He smiled exultantly, but these thoughts were rudely interrupted and his hopes were shattered, for suddenly he felt his fingers tighten on the pen, and involuntarily his hand moved toward a piece of parchment before him. "So, monsieur, you think you have thwarted me. Your imagination plays you pretty tricks. You have killed your son because of them. I, monsieur, have never left the ether, and yet I have my vengeance. But, monsieur, if you think for one moment that you have escaped your death tonight, you delude yourself, for die tonight you will." The count stared at what had been written, and a cold perspiration broke out upon his forehead. Outside, the storm raged furiously. The count tore the parchment into pieces and scattered them upon the floor. He ran to the window and shook his fist at the sky and cursed the God who had made him. And, as if in answer to that curse, the clouds parted, and a streak of lightning reached out toward him. From the village below, the people saw the lightning strike the castle. They saw a turret crumble to ruins and come crashing down the steep cliff to the plain, and heard a terrible cry echo and re-echo through the night. And some affirm to this day that they heard very distinctly a mocking laugh carried along by the wind above the roar of the gale. Thank you so much for hanging out today. My name is Sol, and this is the Pulp Archive. Now, if you had fun, I'd appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, comment, and share. That stuff really helps. And like most stories we cover here, today's was recommended by you. So, if there's a story you'd like to see, send us an email at pulparchivelibrary@gmail.com. We'd love to cover it. If you'd like to support the podcast and keep us going, consider subscribing to our Apple channel or becoming a member on Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/pulparchive. For as little as $5 a month, you'll get access to all our podcasts and private explicit episodes that wouldn't be allowed publicly. We feature almost every genre of pulp fiction, horror, detective, western, and even sports. Special thanks to our patrons who make the podcast possible and make every episode of the Pulp Archive happen. Every episode is dedicated to our Patreon members. I truly could not do this without you.